Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Overall, we had another great week responding to the reading. Your answers to complex questions have been really impressive. And I'm hoping that we can keep that up over the next 3 weeks so we can jump into the fun part of the semester, which is getting into some original research. And so before I start talking about our reading for this week, I want to go over a couple of questions about our last book that tripped some of you up. And so if you lost points on any of the response questions, I provided feedback. So you should be able to see that feedback by clicking on your Blackboard score. And so if you can't see that feedback for some reason, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Almost all of you understood what Theo Harris meant by the popular history of the civil rights movement. You provided great answers about how popular history has been used as a weapon against contemporary activism. So well done. Really, one of the only questions that tripped you up was this question about how the popular history of the movement mischaracterizes how inequality was perpetuated. And so I want to spend a bit of time on this because if you choose to write a paper on the memory of the civil rights movement, this is an important piece of that story that you're going to have to understand. And so she talks about this at length in her chapter Beyond the Redneck. And so this is really my favorite chapter in the book. And so there she writes that the popular history of the movement focuses on just a few uber villains like Bull Connor, who you probably know from the famous pictures of police dogs in Birmingham, Alabama. But the problem is that when you focus on these uber villains, she writes that, quote, key to popular understanding of the civil rights movement is a view of racism as personal hatefulness or Southern backwardness. And so when you look at racism like that, then you only think about racism comes only from the most extreme racist actions. Instead, she suggests that inequality was largely perpetuated by what she calls polite racism. This is what she thinks is missing from the popular narrative of the movement. And I just want to read a quick paragraph where she outlines this. And if you want to find it, it's on page 84. And there she writes, quote, the focus on redneck racism of the Jim Crow South and its epithets and violence blinds us to the venality of polite racism and the firm resistance to black demands, as King aptly characterized it. Other polite embodiments of racism were endemic across the country in maintaining white supremacy. Public officials and citizens who preferred framings like separation and neighborhood schools, who utilized sociological theories of crime and cultural dysfunction to justify inequalities in city schools, services, housing, and policing, who denied jobs, limited access to government programs, and maintained segregation through bureaucratic means. By making racism only about bombings, blocking, and spitting, the nation gets off easy. Right? And so some of the examples of polite racism that she points out are things like when the parents who asserted their rights as taxpayers to prevent equitable tax distribution to schools in all neighborhoods. It included the parents who didn't call for segregation specifically, but defended schemes that ensured students went to schools in their own neighborhoods. And because neighborhoods were largely segregated, this prevented school segregation. It included people who chose not to fund fair housing opportunities. It included people who hid behind law and order rhetoric to support a harsher criminal justice system, even after they knew that system largely harmed black communities. It included people who turned to cultural explanations to explain racial inequality. And so this is a short list of the things in her chapter, but they are all responsible for perpetuating inequality. And so, and importantly, these people could use colorblind explanations, or what seemed like colorblind explanations, to support policies that perpetuated inequality. Another question that tripped a few of you up, I'll go down, is the question about how the popular narrative hides many of the goals of the movement. And so here, some of you kind of simply wrote that the popular memory of the movement, that the popular memory doesn't cover all the goals of the movement, and then simply just stop there without actually listing the goals that the narrative misses. And so remember to be specific in your answers. And so I'll read where she quickly summarizes the goals that the popular narrative misses, because it's important for anyone who wants to write a paper on this subject. So a good paragraph is on page 125, where she writes, activists substantive, excuse me, I can't talk today, desegregation, massive transformation of the criminal justice system, anti-poverty programs and welfare rights, school equity and the incorporation of Black history into the curriculum, jobs and union rights, anti-colonialism, and an end to the United States involvement in Vietnam. And so you didn't need to explain all of those issues, but explaining maybe 3 would have helped you write a much more kind of provide more specifics in your answer. Okay, so let's jump into the reading for this week. Go to the reading response here. And so the reading for this week is Ted Steinberg's Acts of God. Now, I've assigned this reading because I hope it will spark some interest when we get to the research stage. I doubt that many of you have thought about studying the history of natural disasters, but it offers great insight into American history. It gets to questions about capitalism, the role of the federal government, the changing environment, and social inequality. And one of the interesting questions that this book seeks to answer is, why do so many Americans live in areas that are susceptible to natural disasters? And why do Americans continue to live there after these natural disasters continue to hit? And I think you're going to enjoy exploring those questions with Steinberg. And so right off the bat, I want to challenge you with a new question. And I'm not going to give you the argument for this book. I want you to try to figure it out yourself. And I find that a lot of students skip over the introduction of books, and that's the biggest mistake that you can make. The introduction is where an author offers the central argument of the book and tells you what the book is about. And if you skip it, you're already reading at a great disadvantage. And so nice authors will give you a big red flag that tells you that the argument is coming next. So the nicest authors will write, I argue, or this book argues, and you know that the author is about to give you the argument. Not everyone is that nice, right? If a statement like that isn't in the introduction, you're looking for a strong claim that the author is going to base this book around. It's a claim that every chapter is going to support. And I see a lot of students confuse the argument with a sentence that starts with something like, this book will explore, or this book covers. And I can see why you might think this is the argument, but no argument will ever start with, this book covers or explores. Those sentences are there to tell you about the content of the book, or maybe a research question. And so I want to challenge you to find the central claim that's in the introduction. Right? Do your best. I won't mark off points if you get it wrong. And when I upload the next video, I'll go over everyone's responses and show you exactly where in the introduction Steinberg reveals the central argument. And I also want to challenge you with the next question, right? And so in the introduction, he introduces you to what he calls 3 subfields. And I'm going to, in this class, I'm going to refer to them as methods. And those are cultural history, social history, and environmental history. That Steinberg talks about. And so these are all different approaches to studying history that we're going to start diving into, and will be really valuable once we begin to start conducting your own research. And so in the introduction, he gives a brief explanation of these approaches. And I want you to provide Steinberg's descriptions of each of those approaches in your reading response. But I also want to challenge you as you read the book to figure out which parts of the book fall into environmental history, cultural history, and social history. And when I upload the next video, you can see if you're on the right track. And so remember, you can always email me with questions. We can always set up a call to talk about the book, or talk about any questions on Blackboard. All right, I'll see everybody next week.